Kieran Vale stepped off the speedboat and into the soft white sand like a man who wanted to disappear. Except he was the kind of man no one ever forgot. He wore black sunglasses that didn't hide the tension in his jaw, and the linen shirt hanging open over his chest did little to tone down the tension coiled in his entire body. His hair was still messy from the helicopter that had dropped him off at the mainland, and now here he was on a remote lagoon on the southern coast, where cell service died and no one cared about stock markets or scandal, exactly what he needed, Mr. Vale, the boat driver called behind him. You sure you don't want the name of a resort? Kieran didn't even turn around. No resort, just peace. He kept walking. The lagoon was tucked between cliffs and jungle-covered hills, and the water was so clear it looked like glass. It was quiet, no cameras, no paparazzi, no board members asking why he'd walked out of a billion-dollar merger at the last minute. Because he was done with fake smiles. Done with everyone wanting something. He just needed to breathe again. What he hadn't expected was to find someone already here. Hey, a voice called out in the distance, sharp and annoyed. You're standing on my bait net. Kieran turned. A woman stood waist deep in the lagoon water, arms crossed, soaked in sunlight and attitude. Her hair was pulled into a messy braid, her skin sun-kissed and freckled, and she was holding a long wooden pole like she knew how to use it. He raised an eyebrow behind his sunglasses. Didn't see it. Well, you're crushing it. And if I don't catch anything today, I don't eat. She started toward him without hesitation, water splashing around her legs. He noticed the strength in her arms, the confidence in her stride, not the kind of woman who'd ever heard of him, not the kind who would care if she had. Sorry, he said simply, stepping back. She squinted at him. You don't look like a tourist. I'm not. You on the run, he smiled faintly. You could say that. She didn't smile back. You mess up my catch again, I'll use this pole to push you back to where you came from. And with that, she turned and walked back into the water. Kieran stood there a moment longer, watching her move with the kind of focus and purpose that seemed foreign to him. Then he sat down on the sand, leaning back on his hands, letting the sun hit his face. For the first time in months, he didn't feel a headache coming on. The next morning, she was there again. He had slept in one of the abandoned huts near the edge of the beach, no air conditioning, no mattress, just a blanket and quiet. It was perfect. When he stepped out, she was already waist deep again, casting her net with practiced precision. He walked toward the water. You again, she said without looking. I brought coffee, he said, holding up 2 steaming paper cups he'd gotten from the tiny shack near the dock. One has sugar, the other doesn't, she glanced at him. I take tea. He set both down on a rock anyway. Noted, she sighed and waded to shore, pulling her net behind her. You seriously planning on staying here or just stalking me? Staying, not stalking, he said. You fish for a living? She looked at him like that was the dumbest question she'd ever heard. No, I fish for fun and threaten strangers for entertainment, he laughed. She didn't. I'm Elara, she added flatly. Elara Locke. Kieran, he said. Vale, she raised an eyebrow. Like the resort chain, he hesitated. No relation. That was a lie, he owned them. He didn't know why he said it. Maybe because she didn't care who he was and he liked it that way. She stared at him a second longer, then took the coffee cup with sugar. I'm not nice, she told him, sipping. I don't do small talk and I don't care why you're here. Good, he replied. I'm not nice either. But he was lying about that too. He used to be. Before everything, that day he helped her pull in nets. He'd never used his hands for anything real before, but Elara didn't let him slack off. She barked instructions, corrected his grip, and rolled her eyes when he asked dumb questions. And at the end of it, she handed him a half-grilled fish and said, You're not completely useless, he grinned. High praise. She didn't smile, but she didn't look so annoyed either. Each day after that, he kept showing up. She let him. They worked in the sun, sometimes in silence, sometimes not. He learned she'd grown up here. Her dad was a fisherman. Her mom had passed when she was 10. She lived in a small house up the hill with a blue door that stuck in the summer. She didn't talk much about the past or the future, and she never asked about his, but one night, after a long day of hauling fish and swimming in the lagoon, she sat beside him on the sand and said, You don't talk like someone running from the law, so what are you running from? He hesitated. Everything, he said finally. She looked at him. You don't look like a man who's lost everything. Maybe I'm just good at faking it. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, my dad used to say, no one ends up here unless they're trying to lose themselves or find themselves. Which one are you? He asked. I'm neither. I'm just surviving. A breeze carried her words out to the water, and Kieran felt something shift in his chest. He didn't want to just survive anymore. He wanted to feel something again, and somehow, sitting next to this woman who had nothing but grit and honesty. He was starting to. The next morning, she wasn't at the lagoon. He waited. Hours passed. He walked up the hill to the house with the blue door. He knocked, no answer. He was about to walk away when the door opened. Elara stood there, pale and holding a towel to her arm. Her eyes widened when she saw him. I cut myself on a rusted hook, she muttered. Didn't think I needed stitches. He stepped inside before she could argue. Let me see. I'm fine, you're not. She let him clean the wound, and he saw the way her jaw clenched. She hated needing help, hated being vulnerable, but she let him. When he finished, he said, You need to rest. I'll handle the nets, she stared at him. You don't know what you're doing. Then you'll have to teach me right when you're better. She didn't argue. He walked back down and spent the whole day failing at fishing. She watched from the hill, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. That night he brought her dinner from the tiny restaurant by the dock. Fried snapper, rice, and a slice of mango pie. She stared at the plate. How much did this cost? Don't worry about it. I am worried. That place charges more than I earn in a week. He didn't answer. She looked at him. Who are you really? He met her eyes. Someone who's tired of being someone else. She didn't push, but she let him stay that night on the porch, watching the stars. Neither of them said it, but something had already begun. Elara found him ankle-deep in the lagoon, tangled in the net like an overgrown child. She didn't laugh, she just stood there, barefoot on the wet rocks, arms folded across her chest as water lapped quietly around them. You're doing it backwards, she said. Kieran looked up from the mess of rope and seaweed. I thought I was improving. You're scaring away everything with a pulse, including me. He dropped the net with a tired breath and waded back toward the flat rock where she'd left a woven basket. You should have let me starve. She crouched beside the basket, pulling out a knife and a tightly packed parcel of dried herbs. I considered it. But then I remembered I hate watching people suffer in slow motion. It's inefficient. He sat beside her. You always this generous? She didn't answer right away. She unwrapped the herbs and laid them in the sun. The scent of salt and lemony mint drifted on the breeze. I don't like people who don't try, she said, but I hate people who pretend more. Kieran studied her face. There were no traces of makeup, no practiced expressions, just the sharp honesty of someone who didn't care to soften anything. I'm not pretending anymore, he said quietly. She glanced at him. You still haven't told me the truth. He rested his elbows on his knees. What would you do with it? I'd decide if I wanted you around. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just heavy. He didn't answer her. Not yet. Instead, he stood and walked back into the water, this time with the net untangled. She watched him fumble for a few minutes and then joined him, correcting his grip wordlessly, their hands brushing once and neither pulling away. That night, a storm rolled in. Not the kind that came with fanfare, but the kind that crept in from the horizon, slow and electric. Elara's porch creaked under the weight of the thick air, and she sat barefoot on the steps, watching the clouds churn above the lagoon. Kieran appeared from the trees, shirt soaked through from the humidity, hair curling at his temples. You're not staying in the hut tonight, she said without turning. Why not? Roof leaks, you'll drown before morning. He sat beside her. The wooden steps groaned beneath them. You always this hospitable to strangers, only the ones who can't fish to save their lives. Lightning cracked low across the sky and the wind picked up. Elara didn't flinch. Kieran looked at her, the way her fingers curled around the edge of the step, the way she leaned into the storm instead of away from it. You never left this place, he asked. No reason to. Not even to see what else is out there. She turned her head slowly. What's out there that's worth the noise? Sometimes the noise is the point, she shook her head. The noise is what breaks people. He didn't argue, he'd been broken by it more than once. Rain started to fall, light at first, tapping against the leaves like a warning. Elara stood and held the door open. "Come in before you melt." The house smelled of dried coconut husk and old books. Kieran stood awkwardly near the doorway while she lit a narrow candle on the table. Its flickering glow threw soft shadows on the walls. "You hungry?" she asked. "I'm always hungry here, not sure if it's your cooking or the air." She pulled down a cracked ceramic bowl from the shelf. "Probably the air, it makes you forget you're pretending." He leaned against the door frame. "You keep saying I'm pretending. You keep proving me right." They ate in near silence, broken only by the patter of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Afterward, she poured water from a clay jug into 2 mismatched mugs and handed him one. "Thanks," he said. "You're welcome, Kieran, not Vale." He hesitated. "What if I told you I was Vale?" She didn't blink. "Then I'd ask why you lied." "Because I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does." She set her mug down. "And how's that? Like I'm only the money?" She watched him for a long moment. "You think that's what I want? I don't know what you want." She stood, walking slowly toward him until they were inches apart. "I want people who show up, who don't run when things get hard. Who don't need to hide behind bank accounts." He didn't move. "And what if I've never been that person? Then maybe it's time you find out if you can be." The candlelight flickered between them. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't lean in, but she didn't pull away either. Outside, the storm reached its peak. Inside, something cracked open. The next morning, Kieran was gone before sunrise. Elara found a note on the table, written in blocky handwriting on the back of an old receipt. Had to take care of something. "I'll be back. Don't throw out my net." She folded the paper and tucked it into the drawer without a word. Kieran was on the mainland by mid-morning. No security, no driver, just a hired jeep and a destination he hadn't planned on. The office building was gray and sterile, tucked between a luxury hotel and a private marina. The receptionist barely recognized him until he gave his name. Then her eyes widened and the phone was buzzing within seconds. He walked into the boardroom like a man who no longer needed their approval. "Mr. Vale," one of the older partners said, standing halfway. "We weren't expecting." "I'm not here to explain myself," Kieran cut in. "I'm here to sell." The room went still. He dropped a folder onto the table. "My shares, all of them, I'm out." "You built this company," another man said. "You can't just walk away." "I can, and I am." Someone laughed nervously. "Is this about the merger fallout? We can recover." "It's not about money," Kieran said. "It's about building something that doesn't make me hate myself." They stared at him like he'd grown 2 heads. He walked out before they could stop him. By the time he reached the dock, the sun was sinking low and the sky had cleared. He boarded the boat alone, the salt air cutting through his thoughts like a blade. He didn't know if Elara would still want him back. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the answer. The sky was bronze when Kieran returned, the sun dipping behind the cliffs like it was watching him with folded arms. The boat pulled in slow, its engine coughing once before dying out completely. He carried no bags, no briefcase, just a single canvas satchel slung over his shoulder and the tension of a man who'd finally torn something from himself without knowing if it would heal. He walked the footpath toward the village. The same dirt trail that had once felt like an escape now felt like the only way home. He didn't go to the lagoon first. He went to the house with the blue door. It was open. Elara stood in the garden, slicing through a stubborn stalk of sugarcane with a curved blade. Her braid was shorter, like she'd cut it herself with no ceremony. She didn't turn when he stepped into the clearing. "You're back," she said. "I am." She kept working. "Didn't say when." "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." She turned then, eyes steady. "You left before I told you anything like that. I didn't want to make promises I hadn't earned." She jammed the blade into the soil and leaned on it. "And now, I sold everything," he said. "I'm not Vale anymore, not in the way I was." Elara tilted her head slightly. "And what are you now?" He walked closer until the scent of crushed cane and earth filled the space between them. "Someone who wants to show up every day," he said, "for something that's real." She didn't speak right away, and he didn't rush her. The wind whistled low through the banana trees, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing. "You think that's enough?" she asked. He nodded. I don't expect it to be, but I want to try. She reached down, yanked the blade free, and walked past him toward the porch. He followed without a word. She handed him a glass of cane water from an old clay jug, her hands stained with soil and sugar. "You're on my porch again," she said. "I'd like to stay. For how long? As long as you'll let me." She sat on the edge of the railing, the wood creaking beneath her. "You look different. Like someone who's been dropped from a tall place." "I was, and did the landing hurt?" He took a slow sip of the water. "Only until I realized I was finally on solid ground." She stared at him, and something flickered in her eyes, not forgiveness, not yet. But something close enough to make him breathe easier. "There's a festival tomorrow night," she said. "End of the season, people come down from the hills. There's music, dancing, too much rum." "You going?" She shrugged. "I usually don't. But maybe this year I will." He leaned against the post beside her. "If you do, I'll be there." She stood, wiping her hands on her shorts. "Don't wear anything expensive. You'll stand out." "I don't have anything expensive anymore." She walked inside without another word, but left the door open behind her. The next evening, the village square was strung with lights that buzzed like insects. Children dashed between tables piled with fried cassava and roasted jackfruit, and old women swayed to the beat of a single worn drum and a flute that trailed the melody like smoke. Kieran stepped into the crowd in a linen shirt that didn't quite fit and sandals that blistered him within minutes. He carried a small paper bag in one hand and a quiet kind of hope in the other. He spotted her near the edge of the square, talking to a boy who looked about 16 and towered over her. The boy handed her a carved wooden box and raced off before Kieran could ask who he was. "You made it," Elara said, turning to him. "I said I would. People here don't always mean what they say. I've had enough of that kind of life." She nodded toward the bag in his hand. "What's that?" He held it out. "Guava fritters. Still warm." She took one, bit into it, and didn't comment on the taste, but her eyes softened just a little. They walked side by side, weaving through the crowd. Someone passed Elara a necklace of dried shells, and she slipped it over Kieran's head without asking. "You'll need that," she said. "Otherwise they'll think you're still visiting." He stopped walking. "I'm not visiting." She looked at him. "You sure about that?" He pulled something from his pocket, a small brass key scratched and unpolished. "I bought the hut," he said, "the one by the lagoon." Her eyebrows lifted. "You bought that wreck, already started fixing the roof." She didn't laugh, but her shoulders relaxed. "You're stubborn. You like that. I tolerate it." They reached the edge of the square where the music slowed and couples drifted onto the sand. No one danced with steps, just with instinct and rhythm. Elara hesitated, then turned toward him. "Do you dance?" "Not well." She reached for his hand. "Good, you'll fit right in." They moved together, offbeat and barely coordinated, but neither of them cared. The ocean murmured just beyond the trees, and the night wrapped around them like a secret no one else would hear. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, her voice low. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Because you don't want anything from me," he said. "Accept the truth. There's not a lot of room for lies out here. That's why I stayed." They kept dancing, slow and unpracticed. She didn't pull away when his hand settled against her waist. He didn't flinch when her fingers curled around his collar. He leaned in, voice near her ear. "Can I ask you something?" "You're already doing it." "Would you ever leave this place?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was quiet. "I never wanted to, but now I think, maybe I don't have to stay here to keep who I am." He pulled back enough to see her face. "Then come with me." "Not back to the city, somewhere new, somewhere we choose." "That's fast." "I don't have time for slow." She searched his eyes. "If I say yes, I'm not changing for you. I'd never ask you to, and I'm not giving up the sea. Then we find one together." The music faded into the sound of waves and laughter, and she stepped closer. "I'm not promising anything yet. I'll earn it." She nodded once. "Start by fixing that damn roof," she said. He smiled. And this time she smiled back. The first nail split the board. Kieran tossed it aside and reached for another, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. The hut's roof had been half rotten when he bought it. Now it was less of a shelter and more of a puzzle, one he was determined to solve, even if it meant blisters and sunburn and splinters in places he didn't know could splinter. Elara stood a few yards away, knee-deep in the overgrown grass that curled around the edge of the clearing. She was stringing a line of bamboo lanterns between two posts, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't ask if he needed help. She knew he wouldn't accept it. "You're putting those beams too close together," she called without turning. "They're crooked." "I'm compensating. You're overthinking it, and you're judging from 20 feet away." "I don't need to be closer. I can hear the frustration in your hammering." Kieran looked down at the beam, crooked despite his best efforts. "Fine, teach me." She didn't move. "Ask better." He set the hammer down. "Elara Locke, will you please show me how to fix this roof before I accidentally build a sculpture instead of a home?" She walked over slowly, brushing her palms off on her shorts. "That's better." She climbed the step ladder beside him, took the hammer from his hand, and started measuring by eye. She moved with the kind of confidence that made it clear she'd never once relied on instructions. Her fingers were calloused, her arms steady. "You know this isn't how I pictured my life," Kieran said. She didn't look at him. "Which part? Any of it. Living here, building something with my own hands, falling for someone who doesn't give a damn about my past." Elara adjusted the beam and held out her hand. "Nail." He passed her one. "I didn't picture this either," she said. "I thought I'd be alone, not in a sad way, just simple, predictable." He handed her another. "Do you miss that version of life?" She paused. "Sometimes, but only when I'm tired." "I'll let you rest whenever you want." She glanced at him. "You're not a rest kind of man." "I'm learning." They worked in silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel awkward but lived easily between them now. By the time the roof was secure, the sun had tipped low and the tide had drawn back, revealing smooth stones and tiny shells embedded in the wet sand. Gulls circled overhead, casting long shadows across the clearing. Elara stepped back, brushing sawdust from her shirt. "You're not terrible at this," he grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment. You should. I don't hand them out like candy." Kieran walked to the edge of the porch, looking out toward the water. "I've been thinking about something." She leaned against the post, arms crossed. "Dangerous? I want to build more here, not just the hut, something real, maybe a small boat workshop, a place where people can learn to build or fish, something that matters." She studied him. "What makes you think the village needs that?" I asked. "The man at the dock, he said the old boatwright passed last year. No one's taken his place." Elara tilted her head. "You're not from here." "I don't want to take over anything, I just want to give back. You said people only come here to lose themselves or find themselves, I think." "Maybe I want to belong." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It'd have to be done right. No flash, no press, no charities with your name on them." "I don't want my name on anything." She stepped off the porch and walked toward the path leading up the hill. "Then come with me." He followed without hesitation. At the top, past the banana grove and the ridge where the wind always ran stronger, they reached a clearing dotted with weathered stones. A few had flowers laid across them. One had a carved wooden carving of a fish. Elara stopped in front of the tallest one, my father's. Kieran stood silently beside her. He used to say the sea gives everyone a different story. Some people get caught in the storm, some learn to ride it. Some just drift until they wash up somewhere that feels like home. She knelt down, brushing sand from the base of the stone. "If you want to build something here, you build it with the sea, not against it." "I will." She straightened and looked at him. "Then I'll help you." They didn't speak again until they were halfway back down the hill. The path was narrow, roots curling out like fingers, and Kieran stumbled once. Elara caught him by the wrist without breaking stride. "You always this clumsy?" "Only when I'm thinking too much." "Stop thinking. Start doing." They reached the lagoon just as the first stars began to appear, faint and flickering. The tide had come in again, calm and slow. Kieran turned to her. "I know this isn't the life you chose. But if you ever wanted to change it, I'd change it with you," she said before he could finish. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small wooden box. Not polished, not fancy, just clean lines and careful detail. "I carved this," he said. "Took me forever, and it's probably not even. But I wanted to ask you something." He opened the lid. Inside was a ring, simple, no diamond. A thin band of shell inlaid wood and gold, shaped like a wave to one side. She stared at it. "I'm not asking you to leave," he said. I'm asking if I can stay for good, not just in the house. In your life. Elara picked up the ring and turned it in her fingers. You're not very traditional, are you? I didn't think you'd want traditional. She slipped it onto her finger. Good guess, he exhaled, something easing in his chest he hadn't known was still tight. So that's a yes. That's a yes. He reached for her hand. She let him. The stars above deepened into silver. The waves lapped against the shore. And in the clearing beyond the trees, the lanterns Elara had strung began to glow one by one like tiny floating suns. She leaned into him, not needing words. He wrapped his arm around her waist, anchoring her there beside him. Neither of them had planned for this, but it was theirs, and it was real. Elara pulled the last stitch through the canvas sail and tied it off with a tug that left no room for unraveling. Her fingers were dusty with chalk and callous, but her movements were sure. The workshop Kieran had built behind the lagoon now stood with a wide wooden door flung open to let in the breeze, and the scent of varnish and salt mingled with the steady hum of cicadas outside. You trust it to hold? Kieran asked from the bench across the room, where he was sanding down the curve of a new rudder. If I didn't, I wouldn't let you take it out. He stood and walked over, brushing a hand over the sailcloth. You're sure you don't want to come with me? She glanced up at him, her mouth twitching. You just want me there so I can fix it when it tears. That, and I like having you around. You'll be out half a day, you'll survive. Kieran leaned in, pressing a kiss just beneath her ear. Barely. Her eyes narrowed a little, but her hand found his wrist and held there for a beat longer than necessary. Don't forget to keep west of the reef. It's shallow near the edge, I know. And the current pulls stronger at noon, I know. And the wind shifts fast after he kissed her again, slower this time, enough to silence the rest of her warnings. I know, he said against her lips. When he finally set out, the sail caught fast, and Elara stood knee-deep in the tide, watching the hull cut clean through the water. He had named the boat Mara, after a word she'd once muttered in her sleep, and refused to tell him the meaning. She hadn't stopped him. By late afternoon, he returned with a basket of snapper and a sunburn he refused to acknowledge. She was waiting when he stepped ashore, arms crossed, mouth set. I told you to wear the hat. I did, for 5 minutes. Longer than last time. Elara snatched the basket from his hand. You're going to blister. Then you'll have to keep me inside all day tomorrow. You'd like that too much. He followed her up the path toward the house where a new porch swing swayed in the breeze. It had taken him 3 tries to hang it evenly, and he'd only gotten it right after letting her take over the knots. Inside, the smell of lime and roasted garlic filled the air. She'd already started dinner, and he set the fish on the counter, knowing better than to offer help while she was mid-preparation. You heard from the dock boy today? She asked, without looking away from the pan. Yeah, he said the new nets are ready. Wants to deliver them himself, she nodded once. Good, he needs the work. They'd employed nearly a dozen locals now. The workshop had become more than a project, it was a rhythm, a part of the village's heartbeat. Kieran never made speeches. He just showed up, paid fairly, and fixed what needed fixing. Elara handled the rest. After dinner, they sat on the swing, her legs tucked beneath her, his arm draped behind her shoulders. The sky burned orange with the last of the sun, and the sounds of the village carried faintly up the hill, someone tuning a guitar, a baby crying once, then quiet. You ever think about what comes next? Kieran asked softly. She didn't move. Like what? Like marriage or family? Or something that doesn't need to be rebuilt every few months. She was quiet for a long time. Then, you asking for something? I'm saying I want this to be permanent, all of it, you, me, this place. She turned to face him. You already asked me once, Kieran. I said yes, I know. But I didn't give you a real ceremony, no vows, no dancing. You gave me a roof that doesn't leak and a workshop full of tools no one here could afford before. I'll take that over a party. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of linen. Inside was a ring brushed gold, wrapped in a band of aged coral he'd traded from a sailor weeks ago. This is the part where I insist, he said. She stared at the ring for a long moment before taking it and slipping it on without a word. You're still stubborn, she said. And you still love me anyway. The swing creaked beneath them. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I want the ceremony down by the lagoon," she said, "bare feet and all, especially bare feet." They married 2 weeks later, just as the mango trees began to bloom. The village gathered under paper lanterns and strung flower garlands between the palms. There was no priest, no aisle, just the sea whispering behind them and a circle of neighbors who had become something more than that. Elara wore a dress made from the sailcloth Kieran had torn on his first solo trip. He wore a shirt she stitched herself, the seams slightly crooked, the collar too wide. They laughed through the vows and danced until the moon was high. Afterward, they returned to the house with the blue door, its paint now fresh and unchipped. The porch swing still creaked and the stars still blinked overhead, but everything else had changed. He laid a hand against her belly as they stood in the doorway. "You're sure?" he asked, voice thick. She nodded. "I am." He kissed her, slower this time, one hand in her hair, the other on the life growing between them. The workshop expanded. They carved a cradle together. And when the baby came, she had Elara's eyes and Kieran's quiet, steady gaze. They named her Lanny after the tide that had brought them together. Years passed, but nothing faded. The sea still hummed, the lagoon still shimmered, and the house on the hill stood with its blue door open wide. They never left, because they didn't need to. They had everything they'd never known. They were missing love that didn't need conditions, a home that didn't need walls, and a life that didn't need fixing. Only living, together always.